This is White Plains Week, the weekly roundup of White Plains, Westchester, and world news. With John Bailey, editor and publisher of the daily internet newspaper White Plains Citizen Net Reporter, WPCNR.com. Jim Benneroff, editor and publisher of SuburbanStreet.com and WhitePlains.com. And me, Peter Katz, formerly with NBC, ABC News, and stations from Boston to Los Angeles. White Plains Week, what's happening? Who are the newsmakers? What's in store for the future? The views and opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the participants. White Plains Week is presented on Optimum Cable Channel 76, Verizon Fios Channel 45, and on the internet at whiteplainsweek.com, youtube.com, and wpcommunitymedia.org. Now, White Plains Week.
Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. White Plains, Westchester, and the world. John Bailey, the Citizen Net reporter, with the anchor for all seasons, Peter Katz, and Jim Benneroff is on assignment this evening. And right now, here are the stories of the week for October 19th in White Plains, New York, USA. Sears files for bankruptcy in federal court in White Plains, sending shocks into Westchester, Putnam, and Dutchess counties. Con Edison outlines the steps it will take to shorten restoration of electric power outages after last March's storms. Hudson Link announces ramp meters are going to be installed on I-287 in Westchester at congested entrances at Route 100, Entrance 4, the Entrance Ramp 1 in Elmsford, and Entrance 9 in Tarrytown. Governor Cuomo goes underground to expose state of the Hudson Gateway Tunnel, railroad tunnel, that the federal government has refused to fund so far. The Jamal Khashoggi disappearance continues to dominate the headlines and make Saudi Arabia accountable, maybe, while the murder of the Bulgarian journalist Victoria Marinova is forgotten. And on a lighter note, Shake Shack opens in White Plains, and it is mobbed with eager aficionados. And of course, Peter, we need to go right to the top story, and that is Con Ed making a public appearance.
Well, John, against the background of the devastation left by Hurricane Michael in the Florida Panhandle, Georgia, and other parts of the Southeast, and people in Westchester still remembering how many there were without electricity up here for up to 2 weeks from nor'easters earlier this year and other bad storms which followed, the president of Consolidated Edison announced a $100 million program to make the overhead electrical distribution system in Westchester County more resilient to storms over the next 4 years. This was in response to a county report highly critical of the storm responses by Con Ed and New York State Electric and Gas, NYSEG. Timothy Cawley made the announcement on Tuesday when he met with County Executive George Latimer, Deputy County Executive Ken Jenkins, Assemblyman David Buchwald, and other officials at the Utilities Office in Rye.
We'll invest $100 million in storm resiliency in our overhead system. Following Sandy, we invested about $100 million and saw tangible gains in reduced numbers of outages. We see there's an opportunity to further invest in this system and prevent outages from occurring. One of the issues we ran into in the storms in March was because it was such a regional event, we had to reach far to get overhead resources to come in and assist, and the further you reach, the longer we wait. So we've taken a number of steps that we hadn't taken in the past to ensure we have a more robust staffing level as these storms roll in. I'll just list a few examples. We're increasing our internal staffing. We've increased contractor staffing on site. In part, those crews will do that $100 million work that I discussed. We're going to take an approach largely from input we received from United Westchester and the municipalities. we'll actually have provisions to fly crews in from the West Coast. And the thought there is if there's an eastern storm, the West Coast would be clear. We'll fly them in, and then we've solved the issue. We'll lease about 100 bucket trucks to outfit these, so that can increase our staffing as they fly in. We'll get them in these buckets and immediately hit the ground with more resource. We're also reaching out to local electrical companies that might serve some role in the restoration, be it either damage assessment or the smaller service work to help expedite repairs and get people back in business sooner. Trees were a very large factor in the March event, and they are the #1 cause of outages on the overhead system, down trees. And so we've embarked on a pilot where we have arborists go out and look at trees that are unhealthy, they're in imminent danger of failure, and rather than let them fall during a storm, we're going to proactively work with customers and the municipalities to remove those trees.
I'd like to know, since you have at least 1,000 and maybe 1,500 more workers brought in the last couple of hours, how does this lead?
Yeah, so really the initiatives and the portfolio I described about increasing immediate staffing would take us from about 225 line constructors, and those are in order to get make the area safe and put lights back on, you really need this critical skill set. We'd move from around 225 up to 600 right out of the box with that portfolio. We will still rely on the mutual aid system. And like I said, as you point out, we were 1,200, 1,400 workers strong in the March event. But what this will allow us to do in the immediacy is get 600 line constructors on the ground, affecting repairs, making safe as crews travel in, and it'll greatly impact our restoration efforts and our make safe efforts.
Now, one thing that Cawley also said was that one of the major problems last time around was communication with customers, where customers either could not get through to Con Ed or Con Ed could not get through to customers, or customers who did get through were given incorrect information. Well, he said they've taken care of some software issues they had with communications, handling messages back and forth within Con Edison, and he said they're embarking on a program to provide more text messages to customers. His indication was that when Con Ed says your lights will be back on by 6 o'clock, well, you can count on it. Right, John?
We shall see.
We shall see.
And what happens if you can't charge your cell phone? You can't text. It's just I'd like to point that little logical, you know.
You need to run a long extension cord to someone who does have power, so you can keep your cell phone charged.
Exactly, but I mean, texting is overrated.
But anyway, this was a response by Con Ed. Now, the interesting thing is that NYSEG has had nothing to say of significance after this county report, which really identified the major problems and made some suggestions for things that
they have come up with a program that they announced a few weeks ago, but they are not doing anything about the mutual aid. And the mutual aid organization for New York State is going to come out with a report on the whole thing.
Well, this is what Con Edison put out, and it's a summary of the various steps that they are taking. So it does indicate that they are taking this seriously, and that some of the political pressure which was put on them by elected officials has paid off in action. So,
well, at least they feel so. And what the president did say was that they will need mutual assistance because they couldn't gear up to have 1,500.
Well, you can. I mean, you could if you did staff up to,
house them.
If you staffed up to that level, someone has to pay for it. Right. And you can bet that people, especially those Con Ed customers whose power did not go out during the storms, will have great difficulty in seeing their electric bills rise
I see
to
a
pay for this
statewide
backup.
force would be the answer. A statewide force ready to go anywhere to chip in. And that is really the answer, but nobody wants to do that. 1,500 is a far cry from 600.
In terms of crews.
Yeah, that's right, and that's what they needed in the last couple of storms. So they're not addressing that. So maybe they will cut it to 8 days this year.
I don't know.
And they'll think that's good.
I'll tell you, there's something else that's not being addressed, and that's what has been billed as the most important infrastructure project in the country, and that's called the Gateway Tunnel.
Right.
This was something which has been bandied about for years now. You may recall that when Chris Christie was governor of New Jersey, he put the kibosh on a plan to build a new rail tunnel connecting New York and Manhattan under New Jersey and Manhattan under the Hudson River. It's really, this tunnel is the key in the Amtrak Northeast Corridor system. It's important for commuter rail to bring commuters in. It does carry the Amtrak and commuter trains between New Jersey and Manhattan, thousands and thousands of riders. But the tunnel, this Gateway Tunnel, continues to crumble. Aside from being 100 years old, it was flooded with salt water during Hurricane Sandy. And the salt exposure has resulted in very rapid corrosion now. President Trump killed a plan to put in a new tunnel. Now, that's even after Christie reversed himself and said, okay, I'm now in favor of this, so now Trump has killed it. This week, Governor Cuomo led an expedition on a railroad work car to examine the inside of this tunnel, the Gateway Tunnel, in the hopes of putting more pressure on the Trump administration to restore federal support for putting in a new tunnel. Now, even former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, Republican himself who stood in the way of the new tunnel several years ago, now says this project is vital. Now, here's a bit of what Cuomo saw.
Now, these are 100-year-old steel rebars, and you can see it's all rusted, deteriorated, and it is literally flaking off. You can see how thin it is. To my left, you look at what's left of that rebar, it's just tattered and just rusted and eroded away. If you look at the bolts on that fitting, for example, you can see how the rust, it's not just the rebar, it's everything salt water touches. Look at those bolts and nuts, how they're basically gone. They are just disintegrated over time and they're flaking away. That is pervasive all through the structure of the system. If you notice the white that is on the concrete, there is a chemical reaction when the salt hits the concrete that actually decomposes the concrete on a progressive way. And that white residue you see is not salt left over from Sandy. It is the chemical decomposition of the concrete. Look at it. This comes off in your hands. As a matter of fact, too much of it comes off in your hands. Well, this is not a good thing. Just to give you an idea. And this is even a serious piece of metal, right? Yeah. And you can see how it's just, it flakes, literally just flakes off. How frightening is that? And even this, which is now not exposed. And again, you see the white, which is the ongoing chemical reaction to the salt contact.
Unbelievable. Hey, I'm
John,
not taking a train.
While I was running, John asked, was this on the networks? Well, the New York City stations were there.
Good for them.
Covering this. But the thing is, when you have stabbings and car wrecks and fires, that's what gets the heavy coverage. Stuff like this doesn't get such heavy coverage. But after seeing that, are you going to be comfortable riding on an Amtrak train for crossing the Hudson River through this tunnel?
That looks worse than any subway tunnel in New York. Really. Not that I've been to them all, but it does not look like that.
The Gateway Tunnel project. Now keep in mind that Trump campaigned on this idea of coming up with $1 trillion in infrastructure improvements. And it's been 2 years, almost 2 years now, nothing, not one single proposal. Nothing.
All right. Now back locally, the Lower Hudson Transit Link program announced that they are going to install ramp signals on along I-287, and that is going to start this month,
Now,
they say.
the idea is that when the highway gets congested, we can ease the congestion by keeping cars or slowing down the way cars enter the highway.
Right.
This is something which has been in use in Los Angeles on the freeway system since...
which you drove.
Well, at least the 1970s, and probably a bit earlier than that, although not terribly sophisticated. But nonetheless, my experience, at least from Los Angeles, use of it, is that it does more harm than good, because it just creates more gridlock on local streets.
Now they're going,
and further, it slows you down even more. It adds to the tension. You're sitting there waiting, trying to get on the highway.
And you want to jump.
And you want to, you want to jump the red light.
Not a good idea, particularly in Westchester. 3 Westchester meters are installed at entrances 9, 1, and 4 westbound by the end of October. 10 meters from 14A in Rockland to Como Bridge in 2019 and 2020. The eastbound dedicated bus line is going to open at the end of October on the eastbound bridge.
Now, just last night at 6:45, 287 going toward the new Cuomo Bridge was bumper to bumper.
Yes.
Practically nothing moving.
Not good.
This metering system would have done absolutely nothing.
You couldn't get on.
Couldn't
That's
get on
the
there.
problem.
Yeah. The major problem, you know, is that they do construction on these things, and they're not very careful about how they put metal plates across the road. So cars must slow down to about 2 miles an hour to go over the metal plates.
Right. Let's see what they look like quickly here. Next slide. First, you're going to see a yellow flashing light metered when it's flashing, and then once you pass that, you will see this next device, and that will tell you whether you're to stop or to go, and you have to stop at the stop line. And here's locations in the final situation. There's entrance 1 and 4 and 9, and that supposedly is going to happen shortly. Okay, and that's where we are at. And now, going to something we spoke about last week, and that is the murder of 2 journalists. Victoria Marinova, we've all forgotten about her. She hasn't been covered. But that is not the same with the next person, which is Mr. Khashoggi, who disappeared, and that was the focus all week.
Well, and that leads us right into the Trump thing, because Trump is working with the Saudis to try to cover up the murder of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi at the Saudi Arabian embassy in Istanbul, Turkey. And when failing to completely cover it up, at least to cover up the involvement of the Saudi king and the crown prince in ordering the kidnap and murder. How is it that Newt Gingrich, the man who has been instrumental in setting Republican political strategy for decades, ever since he came up with the Contract for America, you remember that, John, don't you?
Oh, yes.
How is it that he, Gingrich, went on Fox and was able to know about the refugee caravan from Latin America before anyone else heard about it on the news? Well, just who organized the caravan and why? And why could Gingrich predict that the big words in the upcoming election will now be Kavanaugh and caravan? Is this the caravan the Republicans have come up with, perhaps? Perhaps this is the 2018 version of Hitler's Nazi henchmen burning down the Reichstag when they needed something to frighten the German people? And who is paying for this well-organized caravan
mothers
of
and
refugees?
children are really dangerous.
Follow the money,
right.
huh?
Exactly.
Republican Senate leader Mitch McConnell is following the money, and he promises if the Republicans retain control of Congress in the upcoming election, he'll take action to cut Social Security, to cut Medicare, to cut Medicaid. Also, the Republicans would try again to eliminate the Affordable Care Act, requirements that health insurance companies cover pre-existing conditions.
Yeah.
One more example of Donald Trump using his office to benefit himself personally before the election. He wanted his company to be the one selected by the federal government to redevelop the J. Edgar Hoover FBI building in Washington. The government's plan was to turn over the building to a private developer who would then build a replacement building for the FBI somewhere else outside of Washington in the suburbs, then tear down the existing building and turn that site downtown in Washington into a commercial development, such as a hotel, which it so happens would provide competition for the nearby Trump International Hotel, perhaps a shopping mall, an apartment building, or a commercial office building, or a combination mixed-use project. Well, Trump was turned down, and then he was elected president. And now Trump has killed the plan for the redevelopment of the J. Edgar Hoover FBI building. Trump's logic appears to be this: if I'm not going to make a buck on it, no one will, and I'll use my office to make sure no one will go into competition with my nearby hotel. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin announced yesterday that he will not be attending the conference that the Saudis had scheduled for next week in their capital, Riyadh, on economic investment in Saudi Arabia. This followed several days of Mnuchin and then the White House insisting that he will attend, even while the Dutch finance minister, those of France and Great Britain and numerous others who had been invited said they would not attend because of the Khashoggi affair. In another effort to juice up his voters in the midterm elections just a couple of weeks away, President Trump is trying to scare people about the immigrants coming into this country from Latin America. This is the caravan that Newt Gingrich talked about. Now, he says that he'll send out the military to seal off the U.S. border with Mexico. A move like that would be right out of the fascist playbook.
Hopefully they will give them rubber bullets.
As explained in the new book, How Fascism Works, by Yale professor Jason Stanley. In the book, Stanley examines the techniques used by fascists as they took over countries and concludes that we are already seeing Donald Trump going down the same path. Regular viewers of White Plains Week will recall that John and I have been saying the same thing for 2 years, long before Mr. Stanley's book came out.
It was obvious.
Trump's Treasury Secretary Ryan Zinke is the subject of 14 investigations for corruption. Well, how does the Trump administration react to something like that? Certainly not by firing Zinke. Rather,
Slinky Zinke,
the woman in charge of investigating Zinke in the Interior Department's Inspector General's office, she has been fired. She's Deputy Inspector General Mary Kendall. Kendall is a career employee, as distinguished from a political appointee. Political appointees get their jobs directly from politicians, and the politicians expect loyalty from them. So Suzanne Tufts, a political appointee in the Department of Housing and Urban Development, will now be shifted over to the Interior's Inspector General's office. The move was ordered by the White House. The ranking member of the House Natural Resources Committee, which has the responsibility for overseeing what happens in the Department of Interior, Raul Grijalva of Arizona, says, and this is a direct quote, "This stinks to high heaven." Trump's Secretary of Defense James Mattis is reported to be on the way out. Trump praised Mattis to the rafters when he first appointed him, but now, with Mattis being one of those who tells Trump the truth rather than just spouting what Trump wants to hear, Mattis has fallen into disfavor with Trump. Don McGahn is no longer the White House counsel. He left the job on Wednesday. Enough of that, right?
Well, it is not going to stop.
We need something uplifting for a minute, and it's the Westchester County Park System. You've seen Westchester County parks around this place, haven't you?
Yes.
Well, that received national recognition this week. County Executive George Latimer joined Parks Department employees and others at Saxon Woods Park on Mamaroneck Avenue on Wednesday afternoon for an announcement.
This is the fourth time that the Westchester County Department of Parks, Recreation, and Conservation has earned the distinction of being nationally accredited by the National Recreation and Parks Association, the NRPA. The fourth time. This is the only agency in all of New York State to be nationally accredited. And the cost that went into the application and the advancement of this, we owe a debt of gratitude to the Westchester Parks Foundation. We have representatives of the Park Foundation here to help make this possible. This national accreditation is the highest honor that could be bestowed on a park system, and it sets our system apart from thousands of other ones that apply and aren't designated. And the scope and the size and the maintenance and offerings really is a remarkable thing when you consider just how many things Westchester offers in this area. I'm very proud of Kathy O'Connor, who's our Commissioner of Parks, and the entire Parks Department, all the hardworking men and women that accommodate, wait for this number, 3 million guests a year. 3 million people that come through our parks. That's an amazing number.
And John, you know they're getting amazing numbers somewhere else in White Plains.
Yes, last Saturday, the Shake Shack came to White Plains, and that's what it looked like when I dropped there at 3 p.m.
Now, this was what's called a soft opening. It's not,
Yeah.
It hadn't officially opened. This was just something they opened just to give their employees basically the experience of handling people. They didn't expect.
And they handle a huge crowd, and not only that, but all the proceeds went to the Child Care Council of Westchester, and the group that was there for the Child Care Council was amazed at the crowds. We don't have a handle on what they got out of it, but it was a nice way to open. And,
now, when you were over there, you shot some pictures of it. And,
here's how to find it. We're coming in to this shopping center. And there, in the distance, there it is, the Shake Shack. We also talked to a young lady who works there.
How did you get started with a Shake Shack?
Well,
what led you to it?
I am one of the front of the house employees. Basically, I do hosting, I serve guests, and also I do the cashier. So what my story of Shake Shack would be that about 3 or 4 years ago, a person that I was dating at the time had invited me to lunch to the Madison Square Park location, which is our flagship location of Shake Shack. That's where all of this was born. And at first I thought it was ridiculous waiting almost a couple of hours for a burger, but from the moment that I took that one bite, I fell in love with it. I'm a big fan of meat and food, and I love to eat, I love to cook, and it's hard to get that really quality from other places. And when I took that first bite, I fell in love, and I'm so super excited that we have one right here, because I'm part of the community. I live 5 minutes away, and it's so nice to be able not only to serve guests, but also to be able to be served right here in my hometown.
Well,
Yes.
she's pretty enthusiastic about the whole thing,
She
huh?
really was, but everybody was enthusiastic there. But also, we have to mention, on a downer note, Sears declared bankruptcy, and we don't know what that means.
Well, they filed
the
for
future.
reorganization, which involves the Sears stores and Kmart. They announced that they will be closing some additional stores. The White Plains store will remain open, and basically what they need to do at Sears is increase their online business. They need to boost the level of activity.
How about a catalog?
At the remaining stores?
How about a catalog? Worked once.
Sears catalog.
Yes.
Might have something there.
Right. John Bailey, Peter Katz, for Jim Benneroff. Good night for White Plains Week.
This has been White Plains Week. News and commentary about White Plains, Westchester, and the world. The views and opinions expressed on this program were solely those of the participants. White Plains Week, produced by White Plains Citizen Net Reporter, and presented on Optimum Cable Channel 76 and Verizon Fios Channel 45. You may view White Plains Week anytime on the internet at whiteplainsweek.com, youtube.com, and wpcommunitymedia.org. For White Plains Week, this is Peter Katz speaking.